Have you ever wondered what hurts the most after a it's not the loud arguments, it's not EV, it's the silence, a kind of silence so deep it feels like that person never existed in your. And today's story begins with exactly that kind of silence. After the divorce, he never mentioned Li Lin again. Not once. No memories, no reflections, no public regrets. And it wasn't until he stood next to Jing Chao, until comparisons became unavoidable, that he finally realized something. Maybe from the very beginning, they were never the same kind of peep. We often like to believe that love can overcome anything, different. But real life doesn't always. Love might start with emotion, but to last, it needs a league. And sometimes it's only after everything falls apart that you finally understand. I was trying. Li and him, he was stiff. More at temps. But over time, that same difference slowly turned in. When we first fall in love, we tend to see the best in everything. A quiet person becomes deep. But when you start building a life together, reality shows up. Silence can start to feel like emotional distance. Busyness can start to feel like neglect. And the very things that once made your heart race become the reasons you feel exhausted. Their marriage was no exception. It didn't collapse overnight. There wasn't a dramatic betrayal, no explosive scandal. Instead, it was gradual. Work pressure, differences in mindset, the way they saw life priorities, even the future. All of it slowly piled up. Not enough to break everything at once, but enough to slowly pull them apart. Until one day they realized they were living next to someone they no longer truly understood. And then they divorced. Quietly. No media drama. No public accusations. No messy headlines. Just an ending. But sometimes the quietest endings leave the loudest questions. Because when there's no explanation, people start searching for one. What surprised people the most wasn't the divorce itself. It was what came after. He never mentioned Li Lin again. Not in interviews, not on social media, not even in passing. It was as if that entire chapter had been sealed away. Some people called it cold. Others thought it was his way of protecting himself. But there were also those who believed when someone goes completely silent about their past, it might mean they've truly let go. Or maybe they're avoiding a truth they're not ready to face. And then came Jing Chao, not in a controversial way, not as a dramatic third person, but as a completely different presence. Calm, mature, grounded, and most importantly, undeniably in sync with him. When they stood side by side, something just made sense. No effort, no tension, no invisible gap, just a natural flow that didn't need to be explained. That's when the comparisons started. No one said it out loud, but everyone noticed. Between what he once had with Li Lin and what he now showed with Jing Chao, there was a clear difference. Gone was the subtle strain. Gone was the quiet mismatch. In its place was ease, comfort, a kind of connection that felt real. There's a saying, you don't realize a relationship is wrong until you experience the right one. Maybe for him, Jing Chao was that realization. Not because one person was better than the other, not because someone won and someone lost, but because they simply fit. And here's the thing before this. He might not have even realized that something was off with Li Lin. Because when you're inside a relationship, you tend to tolerate more than you should. You tell yourself it'll get better, we just need more time. Maybe I just need to try harder. But the truth is, not everything can be fixed with effort. Some things were never meant to fit in the first place. Looking back, the signs were always there. The small arguments that didn't feel so small. The moments of discomfort that were easy to ignore. They weren't random. They were signals. Signals that something wasn't aligned. And standing next to Jing Chao, he began to understand himself more clearly, what he needed in a relationship, what made him feel at peace, what kind of person could truly walk beside him long term. This wasn't about rejecting the past. It was about growing from it. Because every relationship, no matter how it ends, teaches you something. And sometimes the biggest lesson is this: not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. As for Li Lin, she continued her own path, her own life, her own choices. And somewhere along the way, she likely realized something too. Not every ending happens because love disappears. Sometimes people just can't keep walking the same road together. This story doesn't have a villain. No one is entirely right. No one is entirely wrong. Just two people who loved, who tried, but ultimately realized they were not meant for the same journey. And his silence after the divorce, maybe it wasn't indifference, maybe it was closure. A quiet way of respecting what once existed without reopening it. But here's the question that lingers. Do we only understand the importance of compatibility after we lose? Or maybe, if Jing Chao had never appeared, would he have ever realized the truth? So, what really changed? Was it Jing Chao? Was it time? Or was it something deeper? Something that had been building all along? Because here's the thing, people don't suddenly wake up one day and understand everything about love. Realizations like that, they come quietly, slowly, piece by piece. And often, they only become clear when you're standing in a completely different situation. When Jing Chao entered his life, it didn't look like a dramatic turning point from the outside. There were no grand declarations, no over-the-top displays of affection. Instead, it was something much more subtle and much more powerful. It was the way they interacted, the way they understood each other without needing too many words, the way their energy seemed to match not perfectly, but naturally. And sometimes that's the biggest difference between a relationship that works and one that doesn't. With Li Lin, perhaps there was always a sense of trying to understand, trying to compromise, trying to meet halfway. And there's nothing wrong with that. Effort is part of any relationship. But when effort becomes constant, when it feels like you're always adjusting, always bending, it can become exhausting. Because love shouldn't feel like a performance. It shouldn't feel like something you have to get right all the time. With Jing Chao, that pressure seemed to disappear. Not because everything was perfect, but because it felt easy. Not effortless in the sense that they didn't care, but effortless in the way that they didn't have to force things. And that kind of ease, it's rare. Think about it. How many times have people stayed in relationships simply because they thought they should? Because everything looked good on paper? Because they had already invested so much time? Because leaving felt like failure? Maybe that was part of the story here too. Because from the outside, his marriage with Li Lin wasn't something people expected to end. They looked like they made sense. They looked like they had a future. But appearances can be deceiving. What we see is never the full story. Behind closed doors, relationships are built on the smallest details. How two people communicate, how they handle stress, how they support each other during difficult moments, and most importantly, whether they feel like they can truly be themselves. That last part matters more than we realize. Because when you can't fully be yourself around someone, you start to lose a part of who you are. At first, it's small. You hold back certain thoughts. You adjust certain behaviors. But over time, it builds until one day you look at yourself and wonder, when did I start feeling like this? Maybe that was the silent struggle in his marriage with Li Lin. Not something dramatic enough to point at, but something constant enough to feel. A quiet misalignment. And that's why his silence after the divorce speaks volumes. Because sometimes people don't talk about the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Because putting it into words would mean confronting everything they felt and everything they couldn't fix. Then came Jing Chao, and with her a different kind of clarity. Not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. It's in the little things. The way he looks more relaxed, the way conversations seem more natural, the way there's less hesitation and more presence. And those small details, they reveal more than any public statement ever could. You see, compatibility isn't about finding someone exactly like you. It's about finding someone who fits with you. Someone whose differences don't create distance, but balance. Someone whose presence doesn't drain you, but steadies you. And once you experience that, it changes everything. It changes how you see your past. It changes what you're willing to accept. It changes what you understand about love. That's why, after being with Jing Chao, the realization hit harder. Not as regret, but as understanding. Because suddenly, things that once felt confusing start to make sense. Why certain conversations never worked. Why certain moments felt off. Why, no matter how much effort was put in, something still felt missing. And here's the hardest truth. Sometimes love is real, but it's still not enough. Because love without alignment becomes struggle. Love without understanding becomes distance. Love without compatibility becomes something that slowly fades. That doesn't mean the relationship with Li Lin was meaningless. It wasn't. It was a chapter. An important one. A chapter that taught him what he needed by showing him what didn't work. And maybe Li Lin learned something too, because every relationship leaves its mark. Every ending carries a lesson, even if it's one we don't fully understand until much later. So, no, this isn't a story about losing to Jing Chao. It's not a competition. Love never works that way. It's a story about timing, about growth, about meeting the right person at the right stage of your life. Because who you are in one relationship might not be who you are in the next. People evolve. Priorities shift. Understanding deepens. And sometimes the person who couldn't understand you before simply met you at the wrong time. But that doesn't mean anyone failed. It just means the paths were different. Looking back, his silence makes